So, hello everyone. My name is Daniel, and this is Research on Reality. This is a lecture that I used to do for master students and in intelligent system design and also interaction design. A few years ago, I started to teach there and to share my experience in product design, in virtual reality, and also in human-computer interaction as a researcher, as a product designer. Many things I learned, and this is an introductory lecture where I try to explain several important phenomena, several important mechanisms for the user experience on VR, and I call this lecture called Blending Realities and Interactions. So let's begin. So the first thing that when I started to conduct research and also learn about virtual reality was try to understand what is virtual reality and what is the concept of virtual reality, what it means, virtual reality. And I found that there are many literature, there are many books, there are many articles, blogs talking about probably the same thing, but referring conceptually to virtual reality in a different manner. So I found definitions that refer to virtual reality as computer-generated environment, synthetic environment, virtual environment, computer-simulated environment, cyberspace, artificial reality, and many others. So what it worked for me back then, it was to attach to the definition and the ideas and the vision as well of Jaron Lanier, which is one of the earlier researchers, visionaries, and probably artists and experimenters in virtual reality in late 80s and early 90s. So I usually share this video that you can find in YouTube, this interview from Jaron Lanier, which I'm going.
Well, this is our virtual reality glove. It's called the Data Glove. And the idea is that you can put on this glove, and the glove lets you feel a world that doesn't exist as if it's real and pick up things in the world as if they're real. So it lets you reach into an imaginary world. And these are the special glasses called the iPhones that you put on. And when you put them on, you're seeing inside an imaginary world instead of inside the physical world. So the idea is that by wearing computerized clothing right over your sense organs, you transport your sensory system into a reality that can be of any description.
So this very clear idea from Jaron Lanier that putting certain things over your sensory perception, it kind of transport you into an imaginary world, and that imaginary world is actually computer generated, right? So there we have many inputs in and outputs in sensory perception, and once you try to overlay them with data, with synthetic data or computer generated data, then you could probably transport the user or the player into an imaginary world. And that definition actually worked for me, but I actually go beyond when I try to define what is virtual reality. And the first thing I think is probably useful to understand is that virtual reality as film, theater, I don't know, TV, movies, etc., is a medium, and it's a medium where you can use as a vehicle to do many things, but it's also good to define it by their characteristics. So, for example, we could say that VR as a medium is artificial, is generated by computing systems, uses sensory perception. People's or users or players use sensory perception to navigate, to observe, and to experience. Is inherently interactive. And this was a discussion that was very interesting in early 90s, where people was debating about if something that is not interactive but is immersive and three-dimensional then is virtual reality or not. And for now and until now, I think probably that debate still there, but most of people will say that you require some sort of interaction today to say that is a virtual reality. We also could say that it represents simulations, and we say that those simulations are actually produced by computer systems. And another very interesting debate was about that this seems to be real, that these environments that are we experience on virtual reality, they are not real, and players and users know that, uh, and they are aware that this is not real. But at some point, they seem to be perceptually real, and we tend to believe that the elements around the environment seem to be real at some point, and we engage with them, we grab them, we use them, we interact with them. So here I actually put two definitions. One is an artificial environment, which is experienced through sensory stimulus, such as sight, sound provided by a computer, and in which one's actions partially determine what happens in the environment. So this is a definition that involves interaction, right? And another definition says a computer generated digital environment that can be experienced and interacted with as if the environment were real. So this definition actually includes this discussion of that for our sensory perception systems, this should be or seem to be real, right? Even though we are aware inside the environment that this is not real, but we acknowledge and we answer to that environment as if was real. Then this is very classic literature and very classic frameworks on human-computer interaction, right? We have in the left, the diagrams from Rekimoto, Jun Nagao, Katachi from 95 that define different styles of human-computer interaction styles, where we have simple graphic user interfaces, where we have ubiquitous computers, and then we put augmented information or devices around our space that contain information about the space and interact with us, such as like smart bulbs or smart audio, smart fridges, smart consumer electronics, etc., around our environment. That they talk, they communicate through cloud, and they interact with us. And then we have augmented interaction, right? And finally, we have virtual reality, where we actually transport the player into the computer environment, right? We try to transport the player into this environment that is computer generated, right? So we have a reality, and then inside this reality, we have a computer generated environment, and we try to overlay or put into the sensory perception of people these inputs, right, and outputs, so then people will acknowledge this space as their new reality, right? And then in the right side, we have a classic reality virtuality continuum, which is continuously in debate, right? There's many people discussing about if it's continuum or not, and then where we have this degree between real and virtual environments, and augmented reality and augmented virtuality in between, which is very classic. But then there are many people trying to as well rearrange or reorganize with all the information that we have since 94. It's been probably more than 20, 30 years since this diagram. And now there are much information, much research over virtual reality that can tell us how we can reorganize this continuum and if it's a continuum or not, right? If these type of experiences are actually in a line, in a continuous line, or they are actually disgregated, as separated, arranged in a different form. Now, when we talk about virtual reality in terms of immersion, we have many types, right? We have desktop generated systems, we have tablets, smartphones, right? Entry level VR, which is, I don't know, first devices were Google Cartoon and other things. Then we have caves, which are actually spaces with projectors where people is fully immersed, and sometimes you need to wear glasses to get the first person perspective, right? And then we have head mounted VR displays or VR devices, right, which are the most famous today, probably consumer electronic products on virtual reality. So we have today a great variety of possibilities to produce virtual reality or produce realities that are immersive, and they are in a different in different classifications and different branches, right? So, and today what we actually refer commonly to virtual reality is mostly to binocular headsets based, right? Like when we refer to different brands or different companies, we are referring to mostly binoculars, right? Two glasses or a pair of pancake glasses, which is mounted on the device on your head or some sort of strap, band, or in a headset, right? And every time I show this diagram, which is a very well done diagram from this brand, I try to ask people what it has changed along the time, right? What has changed between, I don't know, early 90s to today, 2024, right? And every time I ask, it seems to be obvious, but sometimes it's not that obvious. What it has changed is actually the degree of immersion, right? What it has changed along the time is that most of devices today contain a very great or um, a very big amount of sensory contingencies, or they support a great amount of sensory contingencies, meaning that they support the movement of your hands, they support the movement and the rotation of your head, they support the movement of your eyes independently, they support the movement of your body and your locomotion, right? You can walk around and the camera is actually following you as you were in reality. There we have seen uh, experiments with VR in smelling and taste at the same time, right? In certain publications. So there are many uh, types of progress in terms of headsets, and you could say that when you're trying to evaluate what is why a headset could be better than another one, you can probably take a look of the degrees of immersion. And in terms of degrees of immersion, we refer to how many sensory contingencies these systems actually support. They are supporting many things. They could actually track our eyes, right? They could track our facial expressions, etc. And we can go beyond, right? They can track many sensory outputs and produce many sensory outputs and capture many sensory inputs at the same time, right? Now, this is a bit old already. It's 2 years already, and years ago when this diagram was presented in a conference, then we were looking into what was the metaverse challenges, and I saw all these people publishing this paper uh, showing what are the main challenges of VR, and at that time it was this hype of the concept of metaverse, and then we observe that there are many challenges and many things. There are things that are better solved today, 2 years later, but there's still a lot of things to do related to multimodal content representation or multimodal interaction, for example. But these are the challenges, and even more, the challenges will go beyond of all this list in terms of what kind of things we can improve on developing virtual environment, virtual reality, and metaverse. And you can take a look on this paper on more detail once you see the presentation. Now, in terms of variety of experiences, there are many type of experiences on virtual reality, and this is also developed probably 1.5 years ago with these examples. Today we have even greater variety of experiences, but if we try to classify them and show them in a one slide, I try to put different type of examples from different things. That we have games, right, drama, and theater, such as the Under Presence, for example, that game it was a drama with real actors behind on it. So games are always the early adopters of new mediums, which is something super positive because it allows to show how more or less the market could work. But then we have meeting calls and collaborative tools such as Spatial, Teams is coming, and many other tools that you can actually see there are many applications that you can find in the market. You can go to the Meta Horizons or Pico Market or any other headsets market, and you will see that there are many uh, applications to produce meetings and collaborative tools that some of them allow you to design together, to have calls, to teleport today, right? And to see your colleagues, your classmates, or people who you need to interact with. So we have also tools for painting, modeling, interfacing, elaborating physical UI and also two-dimensional UI, such as Shape2XR, that I have made videos on here on recommending those tools at the same time. There are many tools that allow you to also transport your two-dimensional user interfaces from, I don't know, Figma or Sketch and put them into a virtual environment using directly their platforms. Some of them you can use Unity, etc., etc. So there are many platforms that are under development and also in the market already that helps you to produce three-dimensional, two-dimensional things, and also helps you to do interfacing for users. And then at the same time, we see that there are training, learning, and skill acquisition field, which is very strong, where we have healthcare. There are many institutions, private companies, governmental institutions working on healthcare. The early adopters were aircraft and aircrew training. So you can see there's also health was one of the early adopters, and then safety and construction, where they develop many scenarios or many hypothetical scenarios where you can train, simulate, and let people learn using virtual reality simulations. There's also this generation of data visualization where you can collectively visualize three-dimensional elements, two-dimensional elements, but also dashboards, right? And there are many people working on that. And at the same time, you have office tools, desktop mirrors, such as the virtual desktop, and I don't know, tools to project or position or lay out your desktop from Oculus, from Vive, from Pico, from other brands. Each of the headsets, they have their own desktop tools, but at the same time, there's also more customized applications that you can download. Some of them you for free, some of them you pay, and that allows you to look at your keyboard in real time, type on it, look at your hands, transport your hands. You can also transport your keyboard into a digital keyboard, many things. So we have a great variety of experiences today, but of course, these have to go beyond, and there are many people working on it. This is more or less the voice of the market in a in a projection from Gartner that we can see that there are opportunities they declare for metaverse, such as digital humans, or at some point they call it augmented humans. These concepts are changing every year, and then we have gaming, virtual spaces, shared spaces, spatial computer, and also the hype of tokenized assets that it was a few years ago in terms of art, producing uh, many other things that are actually digital tokens, right? You will see, you can take a look to the report of Gartner if you want more details, and they reveal a report every year. You can see the trends related to not only virtual reality, because virtual reality, I would say, is a little bit more mature than other technologies, but you can see Web3, or you can see, I don't know, augmented financial operations, augmented humans, immersive workplaces, etc., and everything that relates to emerging tech related to immersive technologies at the same time. Now, when I talk to beginners or people that try to enter to virtual reality, I think the first thing come in mind when I was studying this, when I was trying to learn this, is the earlier model for me is the Zeltzer model. Is a model produced by David Zeltzer, which says that we should take a look to certain things to produce a nice virtual reality experience. And this is not new. This is old. This is an old model from '92, but it's useful to look at it because we at least it's a starting point for anyone. It's a starting and simple point to start to navigate, produce a virtual reality experience. So what Zeltzer says is that we have probably three main factors or variables to look at it when we produce a virtual reality experience. So we should look at the interactions and the levels of interaction of the experience. We should look at this sensation of presence that everyone talked about today and we will define soon in this presentation. And then we will also look at it, the autonomy that the player has inside the virtual environment. So we should look at these three edges or three axes of the experience to produce more or less decent to say or a good virtual reality experience. And there's in this publication there are more details related to what he called the digital Shakespeare, task level or conventional animation system, for example, that requires interaction, or they have a high level of interaction, etc., etc. So I invite you to look at this, look at this article, look at the details if you are interested on. But one of the first models I would say, in terms of user experience, for virtual environments, virtual reality, is the Zeltzer model, which says we should look at the interaction, autonomy of the user, and the levels of presence that this experience is produced. Now, what do we understand as virtual reality presence is actually discussed in early 90s, in the early 90s, and it was defined by the scientific community as the sensation of being in a place while your body is physically located other. So this definition is actually from the Society of for Presence Research. So they define this, but I like to use a lot this definition from Slater, Professor Slater, which says that presence is physically, it's a psychological sense of being there. And this phenomenon occurs when our body actually refers to a virtual environment instead of answering to the physical reality. So this happens regularly. And every time when we interact into a virtual reality application, so let's say we are playing a game that is about sports. So we engage with the game, we move around, we try to dodge certain obstacles, right? And once we dodge obstacles, we're actually answering to the reality, to that virtual reality with our body. But we are somehow forgetting the physical reality and we are. And this have produced certain things. For example, people crash on their regular space, right? Because they are immersed or they are present into a different reality, and their bodies answer it actually to the virtual this virtual environment, right? So the body answers to that virtual stage or three-dimensional environment instead of answering to the physical reality. And of course, most of the experience look for this sensation of presence. You are looking that people engage with what you actually design. So if you are designing I don't know, you are designing a space where you have to interact with objects, you try to hold the object, right? You try that people engage with the environment, and once they hold this virtual object, they are answering to that digital environment. So you see, oh, there's some sort of sensation of presence. So you want the people answer to that virtual environment, and instead of answering to their physical reality. And this kind of change when you produce experience on augmented reality a little bit, because you are actually seeing the space on augmented reality. But for a virtual reality, presence is something that you're looking for. Of course, with all the safety that you can take in consideration when you are designing this type of experience. Now, when we look at immersion, there are many definitions of immersion, like the field of narrative, for example, has a definition of immersion. The field of psychology has another, and the field of virtual reality has another definition of immersion. Now, most of people today is following this type of definitions of VR, which come from those authors I put here in the slide. But I'll say that immersion is more or less is a set of all valid actions that are supported by the VR system. So in general, people, when they refer to immersion in VR, they refer to the system or the characteristics of the system. They are referring to how much or how many sensory inputs this system is actually answering on. Um, and we could say that this immersive system offer high fidelity simulation through multisensory modalities. At the same time, we could say that if this system maps users' virtual bodily action to their physical body counterparts, and then, or this system actually allows the participant to transform from the external world to this self-contained plot or narratives or to this virtual world, then we will say that this is an immersive system, right? Or the system contains certain levels of immersion. And when people compare systems, VR systems, they compare their levels of immersion. They say maybe this system does not support, I don't know, audio, or does not support spatial audio, or does not support I don't know, hands interaction, right? It supports only eyes interaction or gaze or other type of interactions, right? So when we talk about immersion, we are referring to the system characteristics and the capabilities of the system to transport the user by supporting those sensory contingencies, right? Now, when I was studying, when I studied VR and immersion and all these things, it's a little bit hard to disgregate and separate um, all everything that involves VR from neuroscience and psychology and also sensory processing, because VR is a medium that involves multisensory interaction, right? And immerse the player or the people inside the virtual environment or the simulated environment. So it requires to consider multiple things. But here I will say, to make it simple and make it easy, is that people process multiple sensory stimulus at the same time. And when we are now listening to this talk, or while we are actually probably doing certain things, we are sensing the temperature of the room, we are sensing the audio of this presentation, we are sensing that we are sit. In my case, for example, I'm sit. You maybe are stand up, right? So your body has many type of perceptions, such as proprioception, interoception, and exteroception. There are many type of perception channels, right? And we process that in a multiple way at the same time. So it's important to consider it when you design something for virtual reality, is that there are many things that you could use to your favor to design at the same time. There are many channels, right? But at the same time, you should consider that if you overload all those channels, there is no clear communication between the player and the stimulus. And here I would like to pass to another nice, interesting topic. And this is because many people usually ask me about narrative and storytelling and examples of VR related to narrative, related to psychology, media psychology at the same time. So one of the good examples I usually use is this video from Fable.
Believe in.
What would the future look like? What would it be like if you actually had an interactive character in your living room, in your classroom, in your kitchen, reading stories to your children?
How does it?
So this example, just to make it brief, for this video, you can find it in YouTube, and it's agency that developed this experience, which is a imaginary friend, right? Most of people maybe now may not have an imaginary friend, but for some of us, when we were child, we have imaginary friends, right? Friends that actually doesn't really exist, but they exist in our imagination, right? And VR is an imaginary world, as Jerome Lanier, mentioned. And as an imaginary world, we can represent many things, right? So this is the story of a girl whose imaginary friends are actually you as a player, as a main player, and they play with this acknowledgement of where are you or who you are in the whole experience, which is very interesting, producing or enhancing the sensation of presence by drawing your hands, acknowledging where you are, etc., including many of these experiences into the narrative, which is very smart at the same time. So narrative, it has been something that is maybe overlooked until now in virtual reality medium. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, but there are many innovations that you could possibly do, justifying things by including them or integrating them into a narrative. So, and which is a very nice strategy, by the way, you can use in terms of user experience.
We want to have two people in a story.
So yeah, and trying to define narrative, um, many people have, well, narrative is a very strong field in research, and narrative has been touched as well, human computer interaction and many other fields in many ways, particularly in video games or interactive storytelling, etc. So I won't try to define in a very holistic or complete way what is narrative, but I will say that certain elements of narrative may help us to define a nice user experience on virtual reality environments. Okay, for example, events, the order of information, the time when they are present, and the intention of those events, that are all narrative components, right? And all those narrative components are actually very useful to include into a virtual reality experience. Of course, we'll say that to simple define that narrative is a story of a description of events, series of events, so telling a story or describing a series of events. But there's also many forms of telling events, right? And every time when we interact in VR with different games, we'll see that there are many forms of people trying to give us information. There are narrators, there are, I don't know, non-player characters next to us trying to explain us what we have to do, etc., etc. And there are many types of way to say the same story at the same time, right? There's different types of Spider-Man, right, from different authors. Now, we have videos about this in this channel, but I will also explain this. Part of this lecture is explaining what is agency and interaction. Um, and somehow I always try to highlight this concept of agency, bringing into the literature of Janet Murray, which is a famous researcher, I will say, famous for the book Hamlet on a Holodeck, right? So the main rationale of this sensation of agency is that agency refers to this feeling of control over actions and consequences, or is this sensation of that the player has or the user has of controlling actions, and thus actions had an impact on the virtual environment, or has consequences on that experience. So for example, if I trigger something, then there's an earthquake. So my actions has had an impact on the virtual environment, right? So this relationship comes from Janet Murray, that says that people on immersive environments demand for active participation, and the more immersive it is, the more active participation people demand. And people look for tangible results. People look for holding objects, grabbing objects, throwing them to the floor, and interact in a way that this seem to be real. So these elements that actually seem to be real, or these environments seem to be real, right? And people look for tangible results because this reality or this environment, it kind of has some similarities with the reality, right? So once you offer as a designer tangible results, you offer ways of people to have this sensation of agency and control certain things and have consequences and impact on these experiences, then you are producing this sensation of agency. And we say that this sensation of agency has some satisfying power, right? So, of course, we should take a look to the sensation once we start to design for virtual environments. Now, there's always this question between aesthetic and behavior, where we should look at it. And as a designer in background, but many years also working in engineering, I have to say that aesthetic is very important. But there are many experiments in literature saying that behavior is also important. And here I have some screenshots from videos from different from experiment. In the left from Jason Gerald, the one that wrote the VR book, right? And the other side we have an experience where someone is playing a game VR called policy enforcement, right? And this person is actually under attack by this civilian, which is drunk and under attack with a gun. And then you'll see in the right image, you'll see this person is actually hiding behind. And then why you're hiding? The question is why this person is actually hiding behind the car if you are wearing a headset and this reality is actually not real, right? And the same phenomenon happened in different experiments. For example, in the left, when they this next gen this experiment with three-dimensional um, very low three-dimensional aesthetic, right? Very low level of 3D, and we'll see. I don't know if it was Google Cartoon on a very low uh, level of immersion headset, and you will see how these people actually raise their hands when it was threatened by someone with a gun. So seems that behavior actually matters more in a first instance in if we put them against aesthetics. So people with very low level of aesthetics, you can engage in a very realistic form, or in a very realistic you can produce a very realistic answer in virtual environment. And this is something that a lot of people that haven't experienced VR much generally don't understand. And this happens to me at the same time. Many years ago, when I didn't experience with my first hand VR, I didn't understand why the people actually engage so much interacting with objects, moving around, using their body into a virtual environment, uh, even when the environment doesn't look real. And when I try myself, I realized that overlaying into this sensory perception system, it make it engage. It make you engage in a form that is hard to explain, right? But it makes you engage very deep, even though when we don't have a very high level of hyper realism, right? So this is something that is more experiential, right? And then there are experiments proving that this behavior probably in virtual environments it matters a lot. So it's something that we should consider when we design for virtual reality. At the same time, then we also have this. I also use this example in the left. We have Half-Life Alex, right, which is a super high level hyper realism environment with everything interactable, where you can load this cartridge on the gun and you can touch everything and everything is interactable, but you got to connect to the PC, right? Because of the level of rendering is very high. And in the right hand, we have a very old experiment where someone is actually wearing a cable, totally cable to the headset. But this person is actually performing Godzilla. It really believes that it's Godzilla. He is really believing that he's actually smashing those buildings. So then this actually shows at some point that behavior really matters. Of course, aesthetic matters, and when we combine the best of both things, it can create a very compelling experience. But at the same time, we will say that the behavior of this world, the behavior of your avatar, the behavior of other non-player characters or player type characters, even the behavior of physics and all the elements inside the virtual environment is really relevant when you design an experience. And then another question that comes very frequent is the relationship between fiction and realism. So I went a little bit deep on studying and researching time ago, a few years ago, in terms of fiction and realism. And first, before putting them against, I realized that there are many types of realism. There are different definitions, and there are different scenarios where we can use the world of realism. Now, first, I look at the definitions of realism, and I like to use the definition of Alice Hall, which is a media researcher. And I like to use her definition because it's very simple. And it says that realism is a comparison between the representations we experience in media and the representations of real world or our real world experience. So every time we experience media, every time we experience a film, a series, we experience a video game, we experience a virtual reality um, game or training, right? We actually compare those media representations with experiences we have in the real world. So, in terms of the definition of realism, realism is a comparison or is a cognitive exercise of comparing things, right? We could say that is a cognitive exercise of comparing things. But at the same time, we use the word realism to say that to give attributes to something. We will say that, I don't know, a game is more realistic than the other one. And we say that because we are comparing those games with real world. We are comparing them with real world experiences, and we are comparing them between themselves at the same time. So we give the attribute of realism because they are closer to what we experience in reality. But at the same time, there are different definitions of realism, which say, according to Shapiro, Professor Shapiro, which is a researcher in video games and also in realism and media psychology, there are these ideas of absolute realism and relative realism. So we have realism that is more absolute and more straightforward, and we have a relative realism which is more imaginative. So in general, I ask and I put these two images on the slide and I say, okay, is it possible for Doraemon to behave like this, right? And these are AI image generated, right? But I say, okay, is it possible if I ask you if you have seen Doraemon series, right? Or even the manga, and you have read it and you know how Doraemon behaves, then you will say, oh, this is not how Doraemon behaves. It's not how he looks like. It's not that he will behave in this way. So if I tell you, oh, look at Doraemon, Doraemon actually is going to the street and eating people around the street and is destroying the town, etc., etc. And you will say, no, this is not like how Doraemon seemed like, right? So that exercise that you are actually doing, comparing Doraemon between this Doraemon and the Doraemon that you know, is an exercise of narrative realism, right? It's a relative realism. You are comparing within the same world or within the same narrative, the same character, right? You are comparing it how it was before or how it is now. The same people do with many characters, Harry Potter, Spider-Man that we've seen the slide before, and many others. And you compare them and you judge them. And when you judge them between different points of the narrative or in different narratives, you are doing this exercise of relative realism. You will say, no, it's not like how Homer Simpson behaved, how Bart behaved in the past, or how Lisa will do the things, right? If you see The Simpsons, etc. Now, I always also take this image of Midjourney, like so the image below, and I ask if this world is possible, right? Is this world possible? People tend to think that this world is not possible at the first hand until people tell me, oh no, because the furniture will fall, right? Because the people will fall and the buildings are inclined. This is not physically possible. Now, when you are doing this cognitive exercise of telling or answering, right? You at the same time comparing with the physical reality or your previous physical experiences. You are comparing the physics of a real world with this image, which is a possible world, right? And when we say, okay, when we are comparing between what's happening in this world and what's happening in the real world, that exercise is called absolute realism, right? It's an exercise that compares reality, our current physical reality, with um, media representation, which could be an image, a possible world, an imaginary world, a three-dimensional world, a virtual world. So there are many types of realism, and these definitions may help to understand how to produce a good user experience in virtual reality, considering how people actually compare things and what kind of things people evaluate when they are experiencing media. And this is the last thing I will say probably on this lecture is that many people ask for uh, what you call the matrix-like virtual environment or the fully immersive virtual environment, right? And the truth is that at least today, and at least now, uh, we could think that we'll probably go into a headset and experience fully immersive VR, and then we will totally be transported into a virtual environment. But we know that there are many hard and complicated scenarios, such as when we are without gravity, right? If we are in a moon, right? If we are in the stars, in space, right? There's no gravity, and something that will crash when we are producing those experiences is that we have interoceptive channels. We have different type of perception. We say we have interoception, exteroception, proprioception, and many type of perception. And even though we could map sensory inputs and output for most of the channels, exteroceptive channels, such as, I don't know, smelling, the taste, our hands touching haptics, right? We cannot, or at least it's hard to map our interoceptive channels, right? The capacity to acknowledge that we are floating or not floating, we are sit or not sit, we're stand up or we're jumping, right? There are many interoceptive channels, and unless we don't go into the brain of someone um, to change these body internal states, we cannot produce fully immersive VR. It's not something that I would like to. I don't really personally think that, uh, or I don't personally want to put anything in the brain of anyone. But it's an interesting discussion. But today we know that probably there's not this possibility of producing this matrix-like virtual environment. And here I take in consideration the study of Richard Scarves, Mrs. Smith, and Mary Wheaton, which where they actually revisit the diagram of Milgram and the reality virtuality continuum, saying that it's breaking on that line because if we don't go neural, of course, we cannot uh, map or achieve complete immersion, which requires to control these interoceptive channels. So, but we can produce super nice and compelling experiences just with the external virtual environment or mapping the external exteroceptive channels of people. We can produce super interesting things that we are seeing today on the market, on research, and where many people is working on. So I think that's all for today. I would like to thank you if you stay tuned until now, and I'll probably see you next time. These are references for this presentation, and I hope this was super useful. Particularly, was destined for people that are looking into VR, that are looking into design a good experience in virtual reality. They are looking for frameworks, theories, and maybe mechanisms to develop a nice virtual reality or extended reality experience. I hope it was useful, and give a like and see you next time.